Syria, Palestine refugees remain displaced after 13 years of conflict, while others return to heavily damaged homes. And in Jordan, they live on a shoestring. Excellencies, for generations, Palestine refugees have counted on UNRWA for registration, emergency assistance, and essential public services. I commend Member States for their continued contributions and indispensable support. But the agency situation is increasingly precarious. It faces sweeping restrictions throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, and the cash shortfall that imperils its work across the region. Despite painful austerity and cost control measures, a deficit of $100 million prevents the agency from meeting its current obligations. I commend the leadership of Christian Saunders, the Acting Commissioner General, under these growing pressures. And I applaud the tireless efforts by UNRWA personnel to keep delivering under some of the harshest conditions imaginable. I have rarely, if ever, seen such dedication. But let's be real, they cannot keep going like this without urgent backing and financial support from Member States. I am deeply concerned about UNRWA's liquidity crisis, which jeopardizes its ability to implement its mandate. A mandate given by the General Assembly and renewed 6 months ago with overwhelming Member State support. A mandate that enables the provision of critical services to 2.6 million people in need. And a mandate that reflects the international community's continuing responsibility towards Palestine refugees. The cash shortfall has grave implications for the entire region. UNRWA is a stabilizing force in an age of instability, registering, protecting and assisting highly vulnerable populations and countering the hopelessness that can fuel insecurity. Its local personnel provide essential public services and support that millions rely upon every day. As doctors, nurses, counsellors, teachers, engineers and drivers, they bring deep reserves of community trust. In Gaza, for example, UNRWA remains the largest primary health care provider. It conducts immunization campaigns, nutrition screenings, water quality testing and pest control efforts, operates water wells, desalination systems and waste management services, provides psychological support and emergency learning, and has a critical role to play in advancing the urgently needed recovery. Excellencies, I'm appalled by continuing efforts to marginalize and undermine UNRWA. Through disinformation, smear campaigns, legislative actions, operational restrictions, diplomatic roadblocks, and more. Those actions threaten the well-being of millions of Palestinians, and they endanger the dedicated women and men working for UNRWA. Since October 2023, more than 390 of our dear colleagues in Gaza have been killed. I will never forget their sacrifice. Many others have been physically injured or left with the trauma and anguish of losing so many loved ones. Every single one of the agency premises in the Strip has been damaged or destroyed. For nearly 18 months, none of the international personnel have been allowed to enter the occupied Palestinian territory. And earlier this year, its headquarters in occupied East Jerusalem were unlawfully seized in a striking and unacceptable violation of United Nations privileges and immunities. I condemn these actions in the strongest terms and call for adherence to international law. All UN premises are inviolable. And the International Court of Justice has clearly recalled the obligations of Israel in relation to the presence and activities of the United Nations, including UNRWA. No organization can replace or substitute the agency's capacity and mandate. Excellencies, UNRWA has taken decisive steps to ensure its house is in order. This includes reaffirming its commitment to uphold humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality and independence, updating its policy on outside and political activities, fully implementing 40 recommendations of the independent review of UNRWA's neutrality led by Catherine Colonna in 2024, and pressing ahead with the other 10. The agency is also working hard to adapt to new realities, with a sharper focus on building self-reliance and more sustainable, cost-effective and efficient ways to deliver services. Strict cash flow management has largely prevented the loss of jobs for Palestine refugees. But earlier this year, UNRWA was compelled to reduce its service delivery by 20%. That meant reducing salaries for most local personnel, keeping 15% of international posts vacant, and exposing Palestine refugees to more hardship. Any further cuts could push conditions past the breaking point. Excellencies, UNRWA remains essential to preserving the humanitarian conditions necessary for a just and lasting political solution with two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states. I'm counting on you to keep speaking up for the agency and all those it serves. Your political support is crucial, but I urge you to match it with the necessary financial resources. Not next year, not next month, now. By sustaining UNRWA vital work, we can address the needs of Palestine refugees today, uphold international responsibility, and help a volatile region find its way to a just and peaceful future. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary-General. I now give a statement as the President of the General Assembly. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, last week we commemorated the signing of the Charter of our United Nations. The Charter was born from the atrocities of our past and from humanity's determination to build a better future, including, just a few years later, the international community's vision of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace, security, dignity, each in their own state. And yet we know that we have not fully lived up to those commitments. We have not fulfilled the Charter's call to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, nor have we secured the conditions in which Palestinians can live in freedom, dignity, security and self-determination alongside Israel in their own state. It was against this unresolved reality that the General Assembly established UNRWA through Resolution 302 in 1945 to carry out direct relief and work programs for Palestinian refugees. The agency began operations on May 1st, 1950. It was planned only for a couple of months. Because, let us be clear, UNRWA was never meant to be permanent. Because its work is rooted in the promise of a lasting political settlement, the two-state solution. And it was never meant to serve what has now become 3 generations of Palestinian refugees, with millions depending on its assistance, protection, and essential services every day. It was never meant to become a substitute for a public institution of a state. Yet, that is the reality we face. Today, decades later, nearly 5.9 million registered Palestinian refugees fall under UNRWA's mandate across Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. That number includes women, children, persons with disabilities, and families whose daily lives depend on services provided by the United Nations. It includes 543,000 students receiving education across 706 schools, supported by nearly 19,000 education staff. teachers. It includes more than 7 million patients visits each year across 140 UNRWA primary healthcare facilities. It includes entire communities relying on clean water, sanitation, waste collection, emergency learning, and psychological support provided by this unique UN agency, UNRWA. Across its 5 fields of operation, UNRWA remains one of the largest providers of these essential services, offering hope where so little remains. Meanwhile, we all know their work comes with immense risk. In recent years, over 392 UNRWA colleagues have been killed, among the most devastating losses of United Nations staff in any conflict in our history. Despite the loss of its staff and the destruction of its facilities, the agency continues to uphold the dignity and rights of those it serves. But that lifeline is fraying, as underlined by the Secretary General. UNRWA faces immense financial, but also political and operational pressure. Even as simultaneously the agency continues to strengthen how it delivers its mandate by strengthening neutrality, accountability and trust through the implementation of the Kelowna Report and the strategic assessment under UNGA. And I think we are very happy to hear also today about the further steps in this regard. But let us be clear, reform and resilience cannot substitute for resources, nor can they keep schools open, health centres functioning or emergency services running if the mandate itself is starved of funding. To survive, the agency has already cut services hours by 20%, with corresponding salary reductions for most of its Palestinian staff. And still, it confronts an unprecedented cash flow deficit of $100 million for 2026. The math is stark. In 2025, UNRWA received $829 million in contribution, including $76 million from the United Nations regular budget. Yet against of $3.3 billion, that funding covered roughly only 27% of what the agency required. So today, we all make here at the podium a direct appeal to governments, especially also regional governments, to philanthropic foundations, to the private sector, and to individuals. Urgently increase your contributions. Sustain UNRWA's schools. Help rebuild those that have been destroyed, especially in Gaza. Keep this lifeline intact and with this hope for 500,000 Palestinian children. Let me close by reiterating the call I made at the UNRWA ministerial meeting last September, that every member state must do everything in its power to fund this agency. For the truth is plain. If UNRWA cannot deliver, who will instead? Without schools, without healthcare, without clean water, sanitation and basic services, the pursuit of a just and lasting peace, grounded in international law, the United Nations Charter, and the resolution of this body, becomes harder, if not impossible. Financial support is not enough, but it is a band-aid on a larger issue. We need a real and sustainable ceasefire in Gaza, respect for international law, and unhindered humanitarian access. And we need concrete steps toward the two-state solution, as affirmed last year by many of you in September in the New York Declaration and in the Security Council Resolution 2803 of 2025. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict will not be resolved by endless war, by permanent occupation, or by recurrent terror. It will only end when Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side, in peace and security, in dignity, with their own sovereign and independent states. A Palestinian state would mean that UNRWA is no longer needed. Until that day comes, let us never stop working for the two-state solution, and let us never stop supporting UNRWA. I thank you. I now give the floor to Commissioner General ad interim of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, Mr. Christian Saunders.
Madam President, Secretary General, Excellencies, good morning. I would like to thank the President of the General Assembly for convening this pledging conference. I'm also grateful to the Secretary-General for his presence and his unwavering support to UNRWA. The General Assembly established UNRWA in 1949, recognizing, and I quote, continued assistance for the relief of Palestine refugees necessary to prevent conditions of starvation and distress among them, and to further conditions of peace and stability. Member States could not have imagined that this assistance would still be needed 76 years later. The fact that it is reflects our collective failure to definitively address the plight of Palestine refugees. Today, UNRWA is buffeted by winds of change and must confront new political, operational and financial realities. To safeguard our mandate to protect and assist Palestine refugees and to uphold our commitment to giving them the best possible chance at fulfilling and meaningful lives, the agency must evolve. The agency must reform. Madam President, UNRWA remains the major provider of humanitarian assistance and essential public services for Palestine refugees across its fields of operation and plays a vital stabilizing role in the region. In Gaza, where more than 390 of our colleagues have paid the ultimate price and thousands more have been injured or suffered abuse and ill treatment, UNRWA remains the largest humanitarian actor and most capable of providing services at scale. Today, approximately 1.7 million people, both Palestine refugees and non-refugees, depend on the agency's services. UNRWA is a critical platform for recovery, institutional stability, and lasting peace. Preserving and strengthening this asset is essential, not only for those it serves, but for the region's future. With our 11,000-strong workforce, akin to a government civil service, with unparalleled service delivery networks, skills and deep reserves of community trust, UNRWA's capacities are vital for the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2803 and the efforts of the Board of Peace and the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza until an orderly handover to the Palestinian Authority. Today, UNRWA is the single largest primary healthcare provider in Gaza. On average, 80,000 medical consultations are delivered weekly by more than 1,300 healthcare workers. That's approximately 14,000 healthcare consultations every day. The agency also supports public health through immunization, nutrition screening, and pest control. Our water wells, desalination systems, and waste management services benefit over 1 million people. The agency remains one of the largest providers of emergency learning and psychosocial support across the Gaza Strip. We use digital tools to provide basic literacy and numeracy activities for over 280,000 children. In-person learning is expanding through temporary learning spaces that cater for approximately 60,000 children. These services, which keep people and hope alive, continue despite the draconian restrictions imposed on UNRWA. And we are determined to keep working against the odds to fulfill the mandate that you have given us. Excellencies, the situation in the occupied West Bank is becoming graver by the day. Military orders for the closure of refugee camps in the north have been extended, preventing 33,000 displaced residents from returning home. This is the largest displacement of Palestine refugees since 1967. Amid intensifying Israeli military operations, rampant settler violence, and the enormous pressure exerted on the Palestinian Authority, UNRWA's essential services bring a critical measure of stability to the lives of nearly 1 million Palestine refugees. In this volatile context, the seizure of UNRWA's compound in Sheikh Jarrah by the Israeli authorities for the stated purpose of constructing an IDF defense complex is a grave escalation. We continue to address these matters at the highest levels and hope that we can resolve them through dialogue. Beyond the occupied Palestinian territory, Palestine refugees' reliance on UNRWA services remains significant. In Lebanon, deep structural inequalities cause Palestine refugees to depend heavily on healthcare, education and social support services, as well as livelihood opportunities provided by the agency. In Syria, many Palestine refugees remain displaced or have returned to heavily damaged homes and infrastructure. The assistance provided by the agency is a lifeline. In Jordan, despite relative stability, the most vulnerable Palestine refugees continue to rely on UNRWA services. In all our fields of operation, needs outstrip available resources. This is also true globally. The funding landscape is more challenging now than it has ever been. We must therefore find more effective, efficient and sustainable ways of meeting the needs of those we serve. This includes enhancing Palestine refugees' self-reliance, giving them greater agency and more control over their lives. Young people must have new and better opportunities to learn and develop their skills, to excel in the labour markets of today and the future. Women and girls must have access not only to safe spaces, but to nurturing environments that support and prepare them to thrive and to lead. Embracing change is not about weakening or undermining the agency. It is the only way to properly continue serving Palestine refugees. Madam President, UNRWA's humanitarian and development work clearly remains necessary for the time being, but it continues to be challenged. While the occupied Palestinian territory is not a zero-risk operating environment, UNRWA has zero tolerance for any breach of neutrality, impartiality, or indeed any form of misconduct. Our policy on outside and political activities makes very clear that while personal views and convictions are inviolable in accordance with basic human rights, staff must uphold the United Nations values, principles and standards at all times. Staff are thus clearly and unequivocally prohibited from participating in activities or being a member of any militant or armed group. I am deeply committed to upholding the United Nations values, principles and standards, and I expect the same from each and every employee of UNRWA. The agency is also progressing steadily with the implementation of the recommendations arising from the independent review of UNRWA's neutrality conducted by Madam Colonna. As you've heard, 40 out of 50 of the recommendations, or 80%, are now fully implemented. The implementation of many of the remaining recommendations is underway. Upholding neutrality is a shared responsibility between UNRWA and member states. We rely on your continued engagement and support to operate in a principled, safe and effective way in complex environments. Excellencies, UNRWA's financial situation is untenable and the viability of our operations across the region is at stake. The steady implementation of austerity and cost control measures amounting to $175 million in 2025 and the strict cash flow management have largely prevented a loss of jobs. However, in January of this year, UNRWA was compelled to reduce its service delivery hours by 20%, with a corresponding reduction in salaries for many Palestinian staff. We're also compelled to maintain a vacancy rate of 15.5% for international staff due to the overall cash flow situation across the United Nations. Despite our best efforts, a cash flow deficit of $100 million remains for 2026. I must underscore that these severe austerity and cost control measures are not sustainable in the long term and cannot continue indefinitely. The impact on Palestinian refugees and UNRWA staff is serious and compounds the hardships that they already endure. It will simply not be possible to restore UNRWA's operations to their past scope or to prevent further deterioration in the absence of a significant influx of new funding and change. Madam President, continuing to deliver UNRWA's mandate requires adapting to global political and financial realities. Protection will always remain central to our work, and we will retain our ability to respond effectively to humanitarian crisis. However, as part of the agency's reform, there will be a greater emphasis on development initiatives and sustainable livelihoods moving forward so as to give Palestinian refugees increased agency. UNRWA is also committed to delivering essential services to Palestine refugees in an even more cost-effective, efficient and data-informed manner, including by leveraging new technologies and closer cooperation with host countries. This requires carefully managed programmatic and operational change, guided by a clear vision that is supported by host and donor countries alike. The needs and aspirations of Palestine refugees, especially women and youth, must be at the heart of this vision and inform the strategic plan that will guide our efforts. Excellencies, the agency's senior leadership is committed to doing what is necessary to safeguard UNRWA's mandate. But we will only succeed with robust political and financial support from member states and through partnerships with the UN family, the private sector, and others. Let me conclude with two requests. First, that you continue to lend your full political support to ensure UNRWA's unique capacities can be fully deployed in Gaza to support the efforts of the international community, especially the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. Access restrictions must be lifted. Second, that you provide the political and financial support necessary for UNRWA to implement a program of change that will make it fit for purpose. Our goal over the next 5 to 10 years is to make UNRWA more financially sustainable and supportable by reducing duplication and redundancy and by adopting a more sustainable service delivery model. Finally, I would like to thank you all for your generous and principled support that you have provided for decades and ask that you continue to support the needs of Palestinian refugees going forward. Thank you.
I thank the Commissioner General ad interim for the report and also your important work. Before proceeding further, I would like to invite delegations to view a brief video presentation on the operations of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. Thank you to the UNRWA team for the strong message of hope. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I understand that the Secretary General has to leave at this time to attend to other urgent matters. On behalf of all delegations, I thank him very much for joining us today at the opening of this important meeting. I will now suspend the meeting briefly for his departure and to enable the Secretariat to rearrange the podium step. The meeting is suspended, and as we are in the midst of a reform, the meeting is resumed. Before I open the floor for statements, I would like to thank delegations that have already submitted their pledge forms to UNRWA, and kindly invite all delegations who have not yet done so to complete and sign the pledge forms on their desks. These forms should be submitted to the conference officers at the back of this chamber near the entrance. As announced in my letter dated May 21st, 2026, I would like to inform delegations now also of the time limits of 3 minutes for statements for those speaking in national capacity and 5 minutes for statements on behalf of a group of states, in keeping with past practices and in allowing as many as member states as possible to speak and to make a contribution. The time limit will be strictly enforced by means of automatic microphone cutoff. In that light, I invite delegations intending to announce a pledge to do so rather early in their statements. Speakers are encouraged to deliver summarized versions of their statements and to submit the text to e-statements@un.org to facilitate the work of the interpreters. The submitted statements will be uploaded to the United Nations journal entry of this meeting unless marked for interpreters only. As a first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine.
Madam President, Commissioner General ad interim, Excellencies, at the outset I wish to convey our deep appreciation to the President of the General Assembly for convening this annual conference. Regrettably, the question of Palestine refugees remains the most prolonged refugee question globally and one of the longest-standing items on the UN agenda. For nearly 8 decades, Palestine refugees have endured constant forced displacement, dispossession, and denial of their inalienable rights, including their right to return in violation of international law. Over the past 3 years, this has intensified to shocking levels, particularly in occupied Palestine, amid the genocide and relentless Israeli aggression against our people. Yet throughout these decades, and to this very day, UNRWA has played and continues to play an indispensable role in alleviating the suffering of Palestine refugees through the provision of essential services, all while facing violent attacks and a malicious Israeli disinformation campaign against the agency, its facilities, and its staff, in addition to the financial crisis that has reached unprecedented levels, threatening the continuity of UNRWA's life-saving assistance and vital services and programs. Against this backdrop, I wish to reaffirm our deep gratitude to all UNRWA staff who continue to serve under such dire circumstances, while solemnly pay tribute to those who have been killed in Gaza in recent years. We reiterate our calls for accountability. We renew our deep gratitude to the host countries for their steadfast support to UNRWA and Palestine refugees over the past 78 years. We also convey our sincere gratitude to all the donor countries for their generous contributions, and indeed the GA as a whole for its long-standing support of UNRWA's mandate. We welcome the pledges of solidarity and funding made today, and I urge as many countries as possible, those who contribute more, and those who have not yet to do so, to enter the contribution process, which provides some relief in the face.
I thank the distinguished representative of the State of Palestine. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Speaking time 5 minutes. We fixed the problem that the speaking time will come on stream. Afterwards, Bahrain and Portugal.
Thank you, Madam President. The candidate countries Montenegro, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Armenia, Andorra, the San Marino, and align themselves with the statement. The full text will be available online. The European Union and its member states reaffirm a steadfast support for UNRWA and its mandate pending a just and lasting solution to the question of Palestinian refugees, in line with international law and relevant UN resolutions. Palestinian refugees continue to depend on the Agency for Humanitarian Assistance, education, healthcare, social protection, emergency assistance, and the preservation of human dignity. The agency also continues to play an essential role in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as well as Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, contributing to stability across the region. The EU has expressed its grave concern with the far-reaching consequences of the Israeli legislation on UNRWA's capacity to conduct its operations. We reiterate our call for UNRWA to be able to operate safely, effectively, and without obstruction, in full respect of the UN privileges and immunities. We also call for the lifting of all restrictions that impede the agency's work. The decision by the Israeli authorities to demolish the UNRWA headquarters and build military infrastructure in its place in East Jerusalem constitutes a clear violation of Israel's obligations. The EU continues urging all sides to respect international law, including international humanitarian law. We commend the work of all humanitarian actors and call on Israel to allow immediate and unimpeded humanitarian access, as well as for the immediate removal of all restrictions on essential humanitarian supplies and sustained distribution of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza. In this context, the EU reiterates its call for the full implementation by all parties of the ceasefire and all other provisions of UN Security Council Resolution 2803. The EU calls for the permanent disarmament of Hamas and other non-state armed groups, the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza Strip, and the deployment of the temporary international stabilization force. Colleagues, the European Union remains UNRWA's strong partner. The EU provides 82 million annually in support of UNRWA and an additional 17.6 million in humanitarian funding in 2026 alone up to now. We continue our uninterrupted support while recognizing the severe financial pressures facing the agency and join the Advisory Commission in calling for broader, more predictable and sustainable international support. We encourage both existing and new donors to contribute to securing UNRWA's financial sustainability. The EU is committed to continuing in support of the agency and welcomes the significant progress achieved in implementing the recommendations of the Independent Colonel Report to strengthen neutrality, integrity, oversight and accountability. The implementation of the high-level action plan, the establishment of dedicated neutrality structures, the continuing engagement with Member States have contributed in reinforcing donor confidence. We recall to that effect that a specific working group on neutrality and integrity has been created in the framework of UNRWA's Advisory Commission, of which the EU is a member. These reforms must now be fully institutionalized and sustained over time. Looking ahead, we encourage UNRWA to continue adopting its operations to an increasingly challenging environment by strengthening financial sustainability, enhancing partnerships, improving governance, and maintaining close dialogue with host countries and donors. We also support continued efforts to counter misinformation and protect the integrity of the agency's work. Colleagues, UNRWA is not only a humanitarian actor. Its work preserves human development, social cohesion, daily services such as health, education, psychosocial support, waste management, and institutional resilience, creating conditions that will be indispensable for early recovery, stabilization, enhancing Palestinian refugees' resilience. We reaffirm a commitment to international law and a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on a two-state solution in accordance with relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The New York Declaration provides a political framework to guide these efforts. And I conclude with a simple message. Supporting UNRWA is not only a humanitarian imperative, it is an investment in regional stability, in respect for international law and in the prospects for a just and lasting peace. The European Union and its member states will continue to support the essential work of UNRWA with respect to Palestine refugees and to work with all partners committed to achieving these objectives. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council, followed by Portugal and Egypt.
Your Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Your Excellency, the President of the 80th session of the General Assembly of United Nations, Ms. Annalena Baerbock, Your Excellency, Mr. Christian Sanders, the Commissioner General ad interim of UNRWA, Your Excellencies, may peace and blessings of God be upon you. I am honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the GCC countries, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain. At the outset, the GCC countries express their appreciation to convening this annual conference, which reiterates the international commitment to enable UNRWA to implement its mandate without obstruction in its 5 areas of operation, particularly that the meeting is held this year against the backdrop of the harsh conditions faced and endured by the Palestinian people, who are bearing the toughest burden as a result of this humanitarian crisis. The GCC countries confirmed in their meeting held in December 2025 to support UNRWA given the critical humanitarian condition. They stressed the important role of UNRWA in supporting humanitarian and developmental work, and they stressed the importance for UNRWA to continue to provide its services to the Palestinian people to alleviate the impact of the humanitarian crisis faced by the occupied Palestine, and to ensure the sustainability and the effectiveness of all forms of support to the refugees. In this context, we would like to stress the following 3 points. First, the heinous images of the people in Gaza are always at the forefront of our thinking. The unprecedented challenges, the overcrowdedness, and the poor health conditions, in addition to the harsh situation in the West Bank as a result of the settlers' violence, and the humanitarian circumstances of the situation in Lebanon, while the situation there remains to be volatile and unpredictable. Therefore, the GCC countries stress that facilitating the measures and leave obstructions to provide humanitarian and medical aid to those in need is a top priority that should not experience any delay. Our countries pay tribute to the humanitarian work by UNRWA despite the challenges it faces. As to the GA meeting, Resolution 8078, which renewed the mandate of UNRWA, that welcomed by the GCC. The GCC also welcomed the advisory opinion by the ICJ in 2025. The GCC countries underscore the close link between the UNRWA mandate and the realization of the inalienable rights of Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination. These rights are the foundation for the legal obligations on the parties concerned. These obligations respect the immunities, privileges, and inviolability of UNRWA and its premises in the occupied territories. Our countries reiterate the indispensable role of UNRWA, and we stress our support to the comprehensive plan presented by President Trump to end the conflict in Gaza and adopted in Security Council Resolution 2803. The GCC countries underscore that achieving progress in Gaza and reform the authority will lead to enabling the Palestinian people to enjoy the right to self-determination and establish their independent state. We support the cause of Palestine and the efforts of the international community to achieve recovery and to establish an independent, sovereign state of Palestine along the lines of June 4, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, according to the two-state solution, the Arab peace plan, and international resolutions, to achieve the aspirations of the Palestinian people and the peoples of the region to live in peace and stability. Thank you, Madam President.
Representative of Bahrain, on behalf of the GCC, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by conveying my country's deep appreciation to all UNRWA personnel for their dedication to the agency's vital mission in very difficult circumstances, as well as our condolences to the families of all those who lost their lives. Humanitarian workers must be protected in line with international law. Attacks against them are unacceptable. Portugal is worried about the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Portugal is extremely concerned by continued settler violence and Israel's unilateral actions, including expanded settlements, which are illegal under international law. In Gaza, the humanitarian situation remains catastrophic. We call for the full implementation of the comprehensive plan. We stress that the UN and all its agencies, including UNRWA, as well as international NGOs, must be able to fulfill their roles as highlighted by the ICJ and the New York Declaration. Portugal will continue to supporting all efforts destined to relieve suffering in the Strip. Indeed, we massively increase our financial support to UNRWA, reached more than $16 million in a short span, maintaining our political and financial support to the agency's efforts and its irreplaceable role as a stabilizing factor in the region. We also joined the Shared Commitments Core Group with some member states in defense of UNRWA. In yet another sign of Portugal's unwavering commitment to the agency and its provision of crucial services, I'm most pleased to announce an additional financial contribution to UNRWA that will be finalized still this week. Excellencies, Portugal recognized Palestine last September as a contribution to the implementation of the two-state solution. We have been politically committed to UNRWA and will remain so until the achievement of a just solution to the issue of Palestinian refugees. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Portugal. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt, followed by Austria and India.
Madam President, Egypt reaffirms its steadfast support for UNRWA and for its exclusive mandate as entrusted by the General Assembly to provide relief and services to Palestinian refugees. There is no alternative to UNRWA until the realization of an independent Palestinian state on the 4 June 1967 lines with East Jerusalem as its capital. Egypt commends the vital role played by UNRWA during the Israeli war on Gaza Strip. We condemn the Israeli measures and legislation that threaten the agency's existence, undermine its operations, and seek to eliminate what UNRWA represents, namely the right of Palestinian refugees to return. We call to investigate into the violations committed against the agency. Egypt recalls the ICJ opinion to the effect that Israel has no sovereignty over the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Egypt calls for bridging the funding gap estimated at $100 million, particularly as needs continue to grow. We reject approaches that invoke reform as a pretext for suspending or withholding funding. The Colonna report and the ICJ have repeatedly confirmed UNRWA's integrity, and the agency has already undertaken the necessary measures to address reform-related requirements. Funding UNRWA is a reflection of our commitment to supporting the rights of Palestinian people. Supporting Palestine is not an act of charity, it is an obligation, an established international obligation. Egypt stresses that the reform in the agency should not undermine its efforts to support the resilience of the Palestinian people and help prevent their impoverishment, marginalization, and displacement. We reject attempts to shift problems and challenges onto UNRWA and then demand it to address situations not owing to a fault on its part. We likewise reject equating reform solely with the reduction of services. We also reject the practice of sheltering behind UNRWA while expecting the agency alone and without support to shoulder the burdens. Reform must always serve the interests of the Palestinian people and should not be driven by financial and operational crises that could be resolved if the necessary political will existed. We support UNRWA and we reaffirm our commitment to protecting UNRWA, defending the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, and advancing multilateralism. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt. The translation always takes a bit longer, so just in case you wonder that we all listen to the last part of the translation. Thank you very much for the commitment. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria, followed by India and Canada.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Commissioner General ad interim. Austria aligns itself with a statement delivered by the European Union. Allow me to highlight three aspects in a national capacity. First, on the role of UNRWA in the region. UNRWA continues to provide essential services to millions of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. This important work, including on food assistance, water distribution, healthcare, and education, is a crucial stabilizing factor for the region, in the region, and a lifeline for many Palestinians, not least for those suffering in the dire humanitarian conditions in Gaza. This is why Austria voted in favor of UNRWA's mandate renewal last December. While ceasefires are agreed upon, and we're grateful for that, we still see the continued high demand for humanitarian assistance. The United Nations must be able to operate safely, effectively, and without restrictions in this respect. We are greatly concerned about all actions that hamper the delivery of humanitarian aid and about the ongoing pressure on the agency, including through legislative measures adopted last year. Our long-term goal needs to be to make UNRWA redundant by a comprehensive political framework based on the two-state solution and by strengthening Palestinian Authority capacities to take over the services that UNRWA has been providing for more than 75 years. In this regard, Austria reconfirms its commitment to the two-state solution, to the New York Declaration, and to a viable and democratic Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel. Second, on transparency and reforms, for the sake of its own credibility, and thank you for explaining that, Commissioner General, the UN must be beyond reproach. This is why Austria fully supports the findings of the Colonna report. We commend the progress you have achieved in the implementation of the recommendations. We value the regular updates by the agency as a sign of commitment and transparency. Third, since it's a pledging conference, Austria's support for UNRWA. We have, as a long-standing political and financial support of UNRWA, we have already given 1 million earlier this year to UNRWA Lebanon, and we are proud to announce today a further 2 million to health projects in Gaza and the West Bank. We have, on top of that, we will continue to support UNRWA with a contribution to its core budget at the exact amounts to be decided shortly. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Madam President, I thank you for convening the UNRWA Pledging Conference today. I also thank the UN Secretary General and Ad Interim Commissioner General of the agency for their remarks. The backdrop of today's meeting is significant. While the guns may have fallen silent in West Asia, the situation remains disturbingly fragile. In particular, the suffering of the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza, continues unabated. The loss of civilian lives, large-scale displacement, destruction of civilian infrastructure, and severe shortages, particularly of food, fuel, medicines, and essential services, have created a major humanitarian crisis. Normalcy is a distant dream for the Palestinian people. This must change. They have the same right to lead normal lives that the rest of us have. The central role of UNRWA in providing education, healthcare, social services, emergency relief and protection to millions of Palestinian refugees across the region gains particular salience in this context. Over the years, the manner in which UNRWA supported various sectors, particularly health and education, stands out. Therefore, it is our view that UNRWA could continue to discharge key responsibilities towards improving the humanitarian situation of the Palestinian people. Madam President, India's engagements with UNRWA are guided by its unwavering support for the Palestinian people and efforts aimed at addressing their humanitarian needs and aspirations. Overall, our endeavor has been to make a lasting impact on the daily lives of the Palestinian people. We continue to undertake human-centric projects towards this purpose and have provided assistance worth $175 million to the people of Palestine, including projects worth $40 million, which are at various stages of implementation. India also provides humanitarian assistance and disaster relief material, including emergency and general use medicines. The scale of such support has been around 150 tons in the last 3 years alone. We have received a request for life-saving medicines from Palestine, which we shall be delivering soon. We treat UNRWA as a development partner, complementing our own bilateral initiatives towards realizing our vision. In such partnership with UNRWA, India has been a consistent contributor to the agency. We have contributed around $52 million till date. Just last week, we announced $5 million as our contribution to UNRWA for this year and handed over $2.5 million as the first tranche. Moving forward, India will continue to be governed by this spirit of engagement with UNRWA. Madam President, UNRWA is facing several critical challenges, both on financial and operational fronts. These constraints severely hamper its ability to function effectively. Addressing these challenges on priority is vital to UNRWA's future. It is also important for UNRWA personnel to strictly execute their mandate with professionalism, neutrality, and in full compliance with UN rules and regulations. In closing, we reiterate that we support a negotiated two-state solution leading to the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and viable state of Palestine living within secure and recognized borders, side by side with Israel in peace and security.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada, followed by Spain and Norway.
Madame la Présidente, Excellence, le Canada remercie.
Canada thanks the Secretary General and the Chair for convening this conference. We welcome Commissioner General ad interim Christian Saunders in his new role and look forward to supporting his efforts. Since we last met at the pledging conference in July 2024, the situation in Gaza has deteriorated significantly, including unacceptable attacks on UNRWA staff. UN personnel should never be targeted. And we call on all parties to ensure their protection as well as that of all civilians. Canada also continues to call on Israel to urgently lift restrictions on humanitarian organizations and to allow for the scaling up of UN-led humanitarian assistance into Gaza in line with its obligations under the Gaza Peace Plan, endorsed by Security Council Resolution 2803. We call on all parties to abide by their commitments and to end hostilities in line with international law. Hamas must disarm and relinquish its governance role in order to advance to the next phase of the peace plan and to allow space for recovery and reconstruction.
Violence in Gaza and the West Bank has resulted in a dangerous and precarious environment for UNRWA staff and humanitarian workers. Their resilience and dedication despite these challenges is commendable, but more needs to be done to help them succeed. We recognize the challenging decisions that UNRWA must make to protect its staff and beneficiaries. We greatly appreciate the transparent and proactive communications of Commissioner General ad interim Saunders on these matters. And we welcome UNRWA's continued focus on the implementation of the Kelowna recommendations, which Canada has supported. Strengthening the neutrality, accountability, and effectiveness of the organization remains a priority for Canada. Canada is a long-standing partner of UNRWA. Since 2023, we have contributed $100 million to the agency's program budget, including $25 million in 2026. We have also contributed $11 million to the 2026 emergency appeals for the occupied Palestinian territory, Lebanon, and Syria. Canada's support to UNRWA is part of a broader effort to meet the needs of those affected by the conflict. On June 12th past, Canada's Foreign Minister announced an additional $100 million to support the UN, Red Cross and Red Crescent, and NGO partners in delivering international assistance to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. That brings Canada's total contributions of international assistance efforts to Palestine to over $500 million since October 2023. We will continue to support UNRWA as we move forward and support a two-state solution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Madam President, Mr. Commissioner General, I would like to begin by expressing my most sincere gratitude to the UNRWA staff who are operating in increasingly difficult circumstances. I'd also like to express my deepest condolences to the more than 390 workers of the agency who have lost their lives in Gaza since October 2023. This reflects the extremely high human cost of this crisis. Today we are meeting to recognize and continue supporting UNRWA's work. This agency has helped generations of Palestinian refugees, not only helping them to survive, but also to prosper and to give them a decent future, so allowing them to become doctors, writers, scientists, and even NASA engineers. Providing the most basic services like health, education, and preserving their dignity is something that UNRWA does. It continues to be a lifesaver of more than 6 million Palestinian refugees. We need to send a clear message. UNRWA continues to do essential work, and even more so, it does that in a context of enormous difficulties with a humanitarian disaster that continues to worsen. Madam President, Spain is firmly committed to UNRWA. Until a lasting, just solution in line with international law to the question of Palestinian refugees is found, the agency will continue to be irreplaceable. What's more, UNRWA needs to be included in the process of reconstructing Gaza. The agency has 11,000 workers in Gaza with broad experience and which are integrated into communities. Since October 2023, we have allocated more than 60 million euros to the agency. In 2025, we were the fourth biggest contributor, with more than $38 million. In 2026, we disbursed $9 million so far, and we will continue to maintain our financial support. I wish to also highlight the support and solidarity of Spanish civil society for the Palestinian refugee population and UNRWA through the Spanish UNRWA Committee and Decentralized Cooperation, which in 2025 contributed more than 6 million euros. We call upon other donors, old and new, big and small, to join this cause. Madam President, we are deeply concerned that the room for action that UNRWA has is increasingly being limited in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and in Gaza. We condemn the hostile actions taken against the agency, including Israeli legislation adopted in October 2024 and the recent demolition of UNRWA's headquarters in East Jerusalem. Therefore, we continue to call for UNRWA being able to operate in a safe, effective, unhindered way, fully respecting its privileges and immunities in accordance with international law. Madam President, by way of conclusion, supporting UNRWA is not only a response to a humanitarian emergency, it is a contribution to preserving the dignity of Palestinian refugees, ensuring the viability of the two-state solution and the stability of the region. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. I thank the distinguished representative of Spain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway, followed by Iceland and Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner General ad interim. First, let me express our deep appreciation to UNRWA's leadership and staff for their continued dedication to deliver services under extremely challenging conditions. UNRWA has for years operated under unprecedented operational, political, and financial pressures. Ensuring that UNRWA can continue to deliver on its mandate is our shared responsibility. We must prioritise predictable and sufficient financial support to UNRWA, thus enabling the agency to focus on its critical work. We commend the agency for adjusting operations and introducing austerity measures and non-staff cost savings while still continuing to deliver services. Norway is clear that UNRWA will remain indispensable until a just and lasting political solution can be found. President, Norway is deeply alarmed by developments affecting UNRWA's premises and operations, particularly in East Jerusalem. We reiterate that UNRWA's premises are inviolable. Any measures that hinder UNRWA's ability to operate or undermine the privileges and immunities of the UN must be reversed. All parties must respect international law and relevant UN resolutions. President, Norway is deeply concerned about UNRWA's financial situation. We welcome the agency's continued efforts to strengthen its strategic planning and resource mobilization. Efforts to diversify funding sources and broaden donor engagement are important. Norway encourages continued engagement to advance discussions on more predictable, flexible, and less earmarked funding in order to support the agency's long-term sustainability and sustain the agency's core services, particularly as humanitarian needs are growing across the region. President, Norway has maintained support. Norway signed a new 2-year agreement with UNRWA in January this year, providing core funding of Norwegian kroner 175 million per year. In 2026, with the addition of 100 million kroner for humanitarian work, Norway has so far disbursed 275 million kroner, approximately $28 million. Let me conclude by saying UNRWA is so much more than a humanitarian agency. UNRWA is our joint commitment to securing the rights of Palestine refugees.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iceland.
Madam President, thank you for convening this conference. Commissioner General ad interim, thank you for your briefing. Let me begin by extending our deepest condolences to the families and colleagues of UNRWA staff who have lost their lives. We reaffirm our collective responsibility to ensure that international law, including international humanitarian law, is respected. Iceland has been a regular donor to UNRWA since the early 2000s and remains fully committed to contributing to alleviating the plight of Palestinian refugees. Iceland recognized the state of Palestine in 2011 and has since been a strong advocate for its future. The two-state solution remains the only viable path to sustainable peace and security. The situation in Gaza remains unacceptable. Humanitarian access is severely restricted, with Israel continuing to impede the delivery of much-needed aid and the work of UN agencies and key international non-governmental organizations. The International Court of Justice's advisory opinion makes clear that UNRWA must be a part of the humanitarian effort. Earlier this year, Iceland intervened in South Africa's case against Israel before that same court. It is essential that the most vulnerable receive the assistance they need. Children have lost years of schooling, and we must work to restore their futures. We must also be mindful of gender perspectives and the need to include, support and empower women and girls as we work to restore and rebuild. Iceland welcomes the appointment of Mr. Sanders at this exceptionally difficult time for UNRWA, when both strong and courageous stewardship is needed. The agency remains central to the stabilization and socio-economic development in Palestine and the wider region. There is simply no other organization or agency that does what UNRWA can deliver. Iceland has a framework agreement with UNRWA which runs until 2028, providing timely, predictable and flexible core funding. Building on that, we raised our core contribution this year by 40 million kroner to a total of 150 million, in addition to an international staff secondment to UNRWA headquarters. Today I'm pleased to announce an additional core contribution in the amount of 60 million Icelandic kroner, which brings the total amount this year to almost $2 million. I would like to close by reaffirming our unwavering support for UNRWA and the essential role it plays in delivering life-saving services to Palestinians. Iceland is and will remain a trusted partner of UNRWA. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iceland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey, followed by Brazil and Jordan.
Madam President, I thank you, Secretary General Guterres and UNRWA Commissioner General ad interim Mr. Sanders for organizing this meeting and for the valuable remarks. As the chair of the working group on the financing of UNRWA, Turkey thanks all delegations taking the floor today, demonstrating their political and financial support to the agency. At the outset, I would also like to express our deepest appreciation to all UNRWA staff for their unwavering commitment and courage under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. We pay tribute to the memory of brave UNRWA staff who lost their lives in line of duty. While we often speak in these halls about saving lives, UNRWA is on the ground, turning those words into reality every single day. Madam President, for over 75 years, UNRWA has remained an indispensable pillar of stability, dignity, and hope, providing education, healthcare, food assistance, social services, emergency relief, shelter, and protection to nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees. Today, however, chronic financial shortfalls continue to undermine the agency's ability to provide essential services. Simultaneously, UNRWA has come under unprecedented political pressure, including systematic campaigns to undermine its credibility, question its legitimacy, and constrain its operations. No humanitarian organization should ever have to operate under such perilous conditions. We condemn Israel's attacks on UNRWA personnel and premises and obstructions on UNRWA's activities in Gaza and occupied Palestinian territories. These are blatant violations of international law. It is clear that Israel's attacks on UNRWA seeks to deprive Palestinian refugees of their right to return to their land. We must remember that UNRWA is established by the General Assembly, entrusted with a mandate renewed repeatedly by the international community. Supporting the agency and safeguarding its operations are our collective legal, political, and moral responsibility. Madam President, as chair of the working group on financing of UNRWA, Turkey remains fully committed to place the agency on a sustainable financial footing. I am pleased to announce that we have already contributed $10 million to UNRWA for 2026 this year. We have also finalized the internal legal procedure.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. For the past 2.5 years, we have witnessed with dismay an orchestrated campaign carried out against UNRWA operations, facilities, and staff, as well as constraints on its life-saving operations through illegal legislation, disinformation campaigns, defamation, and legal harassment. The appalling demolition of UNRWA's headquarters in East Jerusalem in early January was yet another example of Israel's blatant disregard for international law. Restrictions on UNRWA's operations in the occupied Palestinian territory have directly contributed to a humanitarian catastrophe of historic proportions. At least 73,000 people have been killed in Israeli attacks in Gaza since October 7, including more than 21,000 children. More than 390 UNRWA staff members, those on the front line of protection, have been killed in service. It could never be considered legal, proportional, or justified. Brazil strongly deplores such attacks and restrictions. As reiterated by the International Court of Justice, Israel, as the occupying power, remains under the obligation to facilitate the provision of impartial humanitarian aid by the United Nations and its agencies in Gaza, including UNRWA. Brazil has sought to respond with concrete acts of solidarity. Over the past 5 years, we have provided humanitarian donations to the OPT, including vaccines, medical kits, food, water purifiers, and support to hospitals, though some of these items, such as 150 water purifiers, were arbitrarily blocked by Israel. Madam President, Brazil is honored to conclude today our one-year chairmanship of UNRWA's Advisory Commission. We commend the agency for strengthening its governance neutrality, and integrity frameworks, including through the creation of the Advisory Committee and Working Group on Neutrality and Integrity Issues and on Information Integrity. Brazil is honored by the trust placed in us, and we affirm our steadfast commitment to UNGA and its mandate. As consistently reinforced by actors on the ground, UNRWA is irreplaceable. No entity has the expertise or the capacity to absorb its essential work. We cannot accept its dismantling. To do so would mean abandoning not only millions of Palestine refugees, but also an indispensable pillar of the two-state solution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jordan, followed by the Netherlands and Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. UNRWA continues to provide education and health services and relief and humanitarian response for around 6 million Palestinian refugees. It confirms once again that it is indispensable and that there is no viable alternative to the UNRWA. And this has been affirmed by the UN General Assembly when it renewed the mandate last January unanimously, or with near unanimity. This is a serious test of the international community's commitment to the Palestinian refugees. In this context, Jordan would like to deliver the following points. First, we appreciate the political and financial support that continues to be provided to the agency despite the campaigns against it. We welcome the progress achieved by the agency in implementing the recommendations of the Colonna report. We also welcome the advisory opinion of the ICJ and its confirmation that the agency must continue its role as per international law. Second, in turn, Jordan rejects and condemns the misinformation campaigns that target the agency and its staff, including the legislation adopted by the Israeli Knesset that prohibited its operations and the attacks against its headquarters and depriving it of the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. This is all to distract from its essential role. It is an attempt to weaken some of the international pillars related to Palestinian refugees, which threatens the possibility of reaching a just and lasting resolution to the Palestinian question, as per international resolutions. And accordingly, Jordan calls on all member states to provide urgent financial and predictable and sufficient contributions to the agency. And we reject any plan or proposition that aims to weaken the agency's services. We will continue to stand in solidarity with the UNRWA and will facilitate its work, including the annual ministerial meeting on the UNRWA on the margins of the high-level week at the United Nations. In conclusion, supporting UNRWA is an investment in regional stability and in the credibility of multilateralism and in the protection of the rights of millions of Palestinian refugees. Thank you. I thank the permanent representative of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and
the Kingdom of Netherlands, followed by Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands aligns itself with a statement delivered by the European Union. For nearly 6 million Palestine refugees, UNRWA is a lifeline, providing indispensable basic services. A financial collapse of UNRWA would have grave consequences and further worsen an already catastrophic humanitarian situation. We cannot allow this to happen. This year, the Kingdom of the Netherlands provided UNRWA with a fully flexible contribution of 11 million euros. We intend, pending parliamentary approval, to increase our funding toward the end of the year to 19 million euros. We urge other countries to also step up their support at this very critical moment. We also encourage the agency to broaden its donor base and pursue necessary reforms in full respect of its mandate. As we discuss UNRWA's future here today, we must also address the integrity and neutrality of its operations and staff, as worrying reports emerge from time to time. The recommendations of the Colonna review provide an essential roadmap. We welcome the progress so far and urge UNRWA to continue implementation with clear benchmarks, timelines, and transparent reporting and follow-up. This is key to safeguarding UNRWA's neutrality, strengthening accountability, and maintaining confidence in the agency. The Kingdom of the Netherlands participates in the Advisory Committee's working group on neutrality and integrity and will continue to contribute constructively. We call on all member states and stakeholders to support UNRWA in this process. Excellencies, we remain deeply concerned about the risks faced by UNRWA staff and other humanitarian personnel. Attacks, intimidation, and restrictions on humanitarian access not only endanger lives, they also undermine essential services to millions of vulnerable peoples. All parties must fully respect international humanitarian law, protect civilians, and ensure unhindered and unconditional humanitarian access. We call upon everyone to continue or increase their support for UNRWA and remain vigilant on the issue of neutrality, since no one would want to inadvertently see their support end up in the wrong hands, and to provide financial contributions that are flexible and predictable. For UNRWA to continue operating effectively and credibly, it requires our sustained collective support until a durable and just solution for Palestine refugees is found. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Netherlands, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan, followed by Saudi Arabia and South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to express appreciation for the dedicated and tireless efforts of UNRWA staff in carrying out their mission under challenging circumstances. Japan has been providing assistance to UNRWA to support Palestinian refugees across the Middle East since 1953, even before we joined the United Nations. Most recently, we contributed approximately $35 million to UNRWA in January this year. As we all recognize, UNRWA is playing a critical role in providing essential services such as healthcare and education, as well as delivering humanitarian assistance. UNRWA's expertise and capacity should be appropriately utilized under ongoing development in Gaza, in line with Security Council Resolution 2803 and the Comprehensive Plan. To address current dynamics, UNRWA also needs to revisit its core function. In this regard, we welcome the initiatives led by UNRWA Commissioner General ad interim, Mr. Saunders, to strategize the agency's resources to better provide services. This will help to further gain the trust of the international community and thereby reinforce the agency's ability to fulfill its mandate. In particular, Japan emphasizes the imperative of ensuring the neutrality of UNRWA's staff and educational programs, while acknowledging the steady implementation of the recommendations put forward by the independent review. We strongly expect UNRWA to continue reinforcing its measures to safeguard neutrality and strengthen accountability. In seeking to cooperate constructively with UNRWA, we encourage the agency to advance its reform efforts and keep the international community informed of its progress in a timely and transparent manner. In conclusion, Japan remains committed to actively contributing to the realization of peace and stability in the Middle East region. To this end, we will continue to play our role in close cooperation with relevant countries and stakeholders. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan.
I now give the floor to the representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I align myself with the statement delivered by the sisterly Kingdom of Bahrain on behalf of the GCC member states. Mr. President, I speak to you today at a very critical juncture that requires us all to promote international solidarity and affirming the humanitarian commitment towards our brothers and sisters in Palestine. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has always been one of the biggest donors of UNRWA in recognition of its important role in providing education, healthcare and humanitarian relief to millions of Palestinian refugees. Our support is not just financial. It is a position that reflects our commitment to the Palestinian question and preserving the dignity of the Palestinian refugees. Based on this commitment, I would like to say that the Kingdom has provided $835 million to implement development and humanitarian projects through UNRWA as part of its total assistance to the Palestinian people. The Saudi Development Fund gave $13.9 million to UNRWA to support its vital programs for education, healthcare, and relief. Currently, we are preparing a number of new projects that will be implemented by UNRWA that were prepared in February 2026 with an estimate of $20 million that include main sectors in Gaza, Syria, and Jordan to promote its ability to meet growing needs of Palestinian refugees all across. Mr. President, UNRWA has been targeted by a political campaign. Although it is the hope for Palestinian refugees, these campaigns do not only target UNRWA, but also target the core of the Palestinian question and the right of refugees to return. They go against international law. We stress that UNRWA cannot be replaced, and we warn against targeting it because this is part of an entire campaign. The Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories must be ended. The financial gap in UNRWA threatens its ability to carry out its mandate. We stress the need to fill this gap immediately. Our support to UNRWA is a support to humanity, to hope and stability. Thank you.
I
thank the representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Denmark, followed by Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioner General ad interim, Excellencies, colleagues. Denmark aligns with the statement of the European Union. In December 25, an overwhelming majority of the General Assembly voted in favor of renewing UNRWA's mandate for 3 more years. This vote demonstrated the continued and widespread support among member states for the irreplaceable role that UNRWA plays in providing essential services to Palestine refugees, not only in Gaza and the West Bank, but in the region overall. UNRWA continues to do its important work despite mounting challenges, including logistical and access challenges, political challenges, financial challenges, as well as security challenges. In this light, we acknowledge the difficult decision that UNRWA has recently been forced to make to protect both its staff, the Palestinians whom the agency serves, and UN premises at large. And we take note of UNRWA's clear message that the dismissals in no way constitute a validation of Israel's claims against UNRWA's staff members. In this regard, we will not forget the hundreds of brave UNRWA personnel who have lost their lives while assisting others. We extend our sincere condolences to their families. And we stress once again that we must ensure better protection of those who provide protection and assistance to others in humanitarian crisis. We also reiterate our strong condemnation of the Israeli demolition of UNRWA's headquarters in East Jerusalem. Denmark has consistently underpinned our long-standing support for UNRWA with sustained and predictable funding. We have not at any point paused our funding, and we have contributed with a total amount of $89 million to UNRWA since 2023. This year, we have also disbursed our full annual core distribution of $16 million early. We did this to provide maximum predictability and flexibility to UNRWA and to support the agency's financial stability and operational continuity. In addition to this long-standing support, Denmark is happy to announce today an additional humanitarian contribution of $3 million to UNRWA's OPT flash appeal. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, Denmark continues to support UNRWA, and we are steadfast that as long as there is no just and lasting solution for Palestine refugees, UNRWA remains indispensable. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Denmark. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico, followed by France.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Mexico recognizes and is grateful for the humanitarian work of the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine Refugees. Its role is key in order to address the growing humanitarian needs of 6 million refugees from Palestine and to provide the services needed for education, health and social services in the occupied Palestinian territory, Jordan, Lebanon and Syria. As the backbone of humanitarian response in Gaza, UNRWA represents the only guarantee of life for the Palestine population in the face of the unprecedented humanitarian crisis in the region. We deeply regret that in 2025, 47% of attacks against United Nations humanitarian personnel took place in Palestine, directly affecting the workers and facilities of UNRWA, in particular refugee shelter schools and public health facilities, in a clear violation of international humanitarian law. We condemn acts that resulted in the death of persons serving in UNRWA and other humanitarian organizations who lost their lives in the service of humanity. Mexico also expresses its rejection of the measures adopted by the Israeli authorities against UNRWA facilities in the occupied East Jerusalem. These measures undermine the mandate of UNRWA, which this General Assembly decided to extend until 2029. My country echoes the words of the Commissioner General of UNRWA, who emphasized that this agency has the skills and the experience needed to meet the needs of the Palestinian population in this post-hostility period. It is essential that it be allowed to work freely and independently. The New York Declaration, which was adopted in September, stated that UNRWA is essential, and it set out a very clear timeline for the transition of functions of this entity to the institutions of the Palestinian state, once that state is duly constituted in accordance with UN resolutions. Mexico values the commitment of UNRWA to complying with 40 of the 50 recommendations from the Colonna report. This important step forward will help dispel any doubts over its impartiality and to restore donor confidence in the face of the serious financial situation that the agency has faced for several years. Mexico reiterates support for the irreplaceable political work of UNRWA in the region, and we reiterate our position in favor of a comprehensive solution to the situation in Palestine. The two-state solution must be accompanied by narratives of peace and foster empathy. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of France, followed by Estonia.
Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner General ad interim of UNRWA, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors and representatives, ladies and gentlemen, France reiterates its full support for UNRWA, which is operating in an increasingly deteriorated context. In spite of considerable pressure and obstacles, UNRWA continues to provide essential support for millions of Palestinian refugees in Palestine, but also in Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. In Gaza, where the situation remains catastrophic, it allows millions of people to have access to care, education, and essential protection. It helps spare an entire generation from collapse. The assistance provided by UNRWA and by other United Nations agencies, the ICRC and NGOs, needs to fully resume in full security and without hindrance in accordance with Resolution 2803 of the Security Council and the Gaza Peace Plan. International humanitarian law requires this. UNRWA must also be able to freely carry out its mandate in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We call upon Israel to lift all restrictions to its action, including that provided by the law adopted by the Knesset in October 2024 and strengthened in December 2025 in accordance with the obligations recalled by the International Court of Justice. It is also urgent that there be a response to the serious financial crisis that UNRWA is facing. Since 2023, France has provided 123 million euros in support and will soon announce its contribution for 2026. The accusations against UNRWA were examined extremely seriously and dealt with as required by their gravity by member states and by the office itself. UNRWA did everything possible to respond to that and is with determination implementing the recommendations of the Colonna report in order to ensure its neutrality and transparency. We commend these efforts, which need to be continued. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not forget that UNRWA was created by the member states to respond to a crisis which remains unresolved almost 80 years later. We entrusted it with an exceptional mission that its staff continue to carry out each day, often risking their lives. We cannot turn a blind eye to that. UNRWA is a collective responsibility towards Palestine refugees, and we must involve UNRWA in diplomatic efforts aimed at implementing Resolution 2803 of the Security Council and support a progressive handover of the agency's tasks.
I thank the distinguished representative of France. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Estonia, followed by Luxembourg and South Africa.
Excellencies, colleagues, Estonia aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. We thank the Secretary-General and UNRWA for convening today's pledging conference at a moment of exceptional humanitarian need and political urgency. Estonia remains deeply concerned by the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and by the continuing needs of Palestine refugees across the region. Estonia has recently joined the joint statement on humanitarian access in Gaza and the registration law affecting INGOs, calling on Israel to allow all internationally recognized humanitarian organizations to carry out their vital work without obstruction. Estonia condemns attacks against UNRWA and humanitarian personnel, premises, and operations. Humanitarian workers must be protected and their ability to deliver life-saving assistance must be safeguarded. We also recognize that UNRWA is operating under immense pressure. The agency faces rising needs, severe operational constraints, and persistent funding shortfalls. Estonia's position is clear. We continue to support UNRWA's mandate and its essential humanitarian role. Estonia has already transferred its regular funding support to UNRWA for 2026, and we plan to continue as a stable donor also in 2027. These contributions reflect Estonia's commitment to principled humanitarian action and to the welfare of Palestine refugees. We commend the work of UNRWA's committed staff who continue their work, putting their lives in danger. At the end of last year, our humanitarian director visited UNRWA's Zarqa camp in Jordan. This engagement offered a valuable overview of UNRWA's work. Its strong commitment to students' development in Zorka, supported by digital tools, was impressive. Hearing about the students' aspirations for higher education and their desire to give back to their communities was particularly inspiring. The visit reaffirmed that our support and collaboration remain firmly on the right path. At the same time, our support must go hand in hand with continued accountability, transparency, and neutrality of the organization. Estonia welcomes UNRWA's efforts to implement the recommendations of the Independent Review Group report and encourages UNRWA to continue with their implementation of the remaining recommendations. In closing, Estonia reaffirms its continued political and financial support for UNRWA. We remain committed to working with partners to ensure that Palestine refugees receive the assistance, protection, and dignity to which they are entitled. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Estonia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg, followed by South Africa and China.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner General ad interim. Luxembourg aligns itself with the statement by the European Union. This conference comes at a critical juncture as UNRWA is going through the most difficult period of its history. Disinformation campaigns, legislative measures, and demolitions undertaken by Israel are seriously undermining UNRWA's ability to fulfill its mandate in the occupied Palestinian territory, in particular in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The International Court of Justice recalled Israel's obligations under international law. We call upon Israel to comply with its obligations. There is no doubt that UNRWA remains essential to give Palestine refugees the vital assistance and access to basic services that they need, education and healthcare. The agency remains essential for regional stability and security, including in Jordan, Lebanon and Syria. We commend the commitment of all of UNRWA's host countries. Luxembourg reaffirms its political and financial support for UNRWA. Our Minister, Xavier Bettel, underscored this at the Paris conference on the 12th of June. Supporting UNRWA also means preserving the prospects for a two-state solution and the conditions for a just, sustainable peace rooted in international law. We must act together to ensure sustainable financing, continue reforms, and preserve UNRWA's mandate until a political solution is found. Luxembourg has committed to providing flexible and predictable financial support in the context of its strategic partnership with UNRWA for the period 2025 to 2027. We will continue to contribute at least 10 million euros per year to UNRWA. In 2025, our support amounted to 13.5 million euros. This year, we have already contributed 7.5 million euros, with an additional 500,000 euros to the humanitarian response in Lebanon. We also support the digitization of UNRWA's archives. They are part of the identity and the memory of Palestine refugees. Luxembourg is closely monitoring the austerity measures and the difficult decisions that the agency has taken on human resources under considerable pressure, and we commend the implementation of the neutrality recommendations from the Colonna report. I would conclude by paying tribute to UNRWA staff and their families that have paid for their commitment with their lives. We commend all of UNRWA's staff for their courage and determination to provide vital services to Palestine refugees in one of the most difficult contexts, and they deserve our full support. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Luxembourg, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa, followed by China and Ireland.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Mr. President. We thank the PGA for convening a meeting of the ad hoc committee of the General Assembly for the announcement of voluntary contributions to UNRWA. Mr. President, South Africa reaffirms its full support to UNRWA for its indispensable role in providing life-saving humanitarian assistance and human development services. The agency is the backbone of humanitarian operations in Gaza and beyond the Strip. It has championed human development for Palestinian refugees in the occupied Palestinian territory, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Syrian Arab Republic. South Africa views UNRWA's mandate as inseparable from the international community's responsibility for Palestinian refugees under UNGA Resolution 302. UNRWA is more than a humanitarian agency. It sustains education, health, dignity for 5.9 million Palestinian refugees. The Secretary General just painted a picture of a life of death, destruction, fear, destitution, displacement, and desperation lived by Palestinians. In these circumstances, UNRWA is their only hope. It is therefore important that this pledging conference reaffirms political and financial support for UNRWA to carry out its mandate. Mr. President, we deplore the insidious campaign to end UNRWA's operations. The agency is facing a campaign to push it out of the occupied Palestinian territory, with Israel leading the charge to end UNRWA's activities in Gaza. We denounce the attacks on UNRWA's premises, schools, shelters, and personnel. South Africa strongly condemns the continuous targeting of UNRWA premises and staff since the beginning of the current Israeli genocidal war against Palestine. We abhor the political, diplomatic onslaught on UNRWA, restrictions imposed on the agency, which is also facing financial challenges which impact on its ability to fulfill its mandate in the OPT and beyond. Underfunding UNRWA means denying children schooling and families health care. South Africa welcomes global efforts aimed at ameliorating these challenges, including the pledging conference being organized to raise the much-needed funds for the agency. Mr. President, we welcome the decision by some countries to resume funding and reverse their suspension of UNRWA. We seize this opportunity to reaffirm in these difficult and challenging times our firm commitment to the just resolution of the Palestinian question based on the two-state solution along the pre-1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China, followed by Ireland and Poland.
I thank Secretary General Guterres for his statement and Commissioner General ad interim Saunders for his briefing. For more than 70 years, pursuant to mandates given by General Assembly resolutions, UNRWA has provided relief to Palestine refugees in the West Bank, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and elsewhere, playing an important role in alleviating the suffering of refugees and maintaining regional stability. In particular, following the outbreak of the conflict in Gaza, UNRWA personnel risked their lives to serve as the last lifeline for more than 2 million people, with more than 390 UNRWA personnel paying the ultimate price. China highly commends UNRWA for its contributions, pays high tribute to UNRWA personnel and their families, and will continue to firmly support UNRWA's work. For some time now, UNRWA has been subjected to continuous attacks and pushbacks. Ensuring the normal functioning of UNRWA concerns the survival and well-being of more than 5 million refugees, the defense of the authority of the United Nations and multilateralism, and the preservation of prospects for resolving the Palestinian question. China firmly opposes any efforts to undermine UNRWA, calls on all parties to provide the necessary facilitation and support for its humanitarian assistance operations, and urges Israel to effectively safeguard UNRWA's privileges, immunities, and normal functioning. Funding shortages have severely constrained UNRWA's capacity to provide assistance. The international community, especially traditional donors, should increase support for UNRWA and help it overcome its financial crisis. President, China firmly supports the just cause of the Palestinian people in restoring their legitimate national rights. We have long provided humanitarian and development assistance to Palestine, and have consistently provided and will continue to provide stable financial support to UNRWA. In December last year, President Xi Jinping of China announced that China would provide $100 million in assistance to Palestine to help alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and support Gaza's recovery and reconstruction. China stands ready to work with the international community to support UNRWA in fulfilling its mandate, promote a lasting ceasefire in Gaza, ease the humanitarian crisis, advance the implementation of the two-state solution, and realize a comprehensive, just, and lasting settlement of the Palestinian question at an early date. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland, followed by Poland, and then the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ireland aligns with the statement of the European Union. We reiterate our strong support and appreciation for UNRWA's continued efforts to support Palestine refugees across the 5 fields of operation under exceptionally difficult circumstances. The work of UNRWA is essential to confront the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and to deliver life-saving assistance and essential services to Palestine refugees across the region. Ireland recalls the enormous impact of the war in Gaza, with a death toll of more than 73,000, including more than 390 UNRWA staff and hundreds more UNRWA staff family members. The scale of the impact is appalling. UNRWA's ability to continue its life-saving operations in Gaza is testament to the bravery and commitment of its staff. All humanitarian workers must be protected at all times. The killing of UN staff and humanitarian personnel cannot be normalised, and there must be full accountability. Israel must immediately remove restrictions on aid access and facilitate essential supplies and services to reach people across Gaza. Ireland is deeply concerned by the sharply deteriorating situation in the West Bank, including the ongoing displacement of at least 40,000 Palestinians in the northern West Bank and the impact of illegal Israeli measures curtailing UNRWA's services there. We remain deeply concerned by measures taken by Israel against UNRWA as part of a sustained effort to dismantle the organisation and prevent its operations in the occupied Palestinian territory. This includes the destruction of UNRWA's headquarters in East Jerusalem, which is a violation of the rights and the privileges of the United Nations. Ireland stresses Israel's obligations to act in accordance with international law to enable UNRWA to carry out its mandate in line with the October 2025 ICJ advisory opinion. Ireland recognises the efforts by UNRWA to continue its operation in spite of these constraints. In response to increased demand, in 2023, Ireland significantly increased our annual support to UNRWA and has maintained that support since. This month, Ireland disbursed its second payment of €10 million in core funding, bringing our total core funding in 2026 to €20 million. We have provided €78 million since 2023. Ireland calls on other donors to disburse funding as soon as possible to ensure UNRWA can continue to fulfil its mandate. We are committed to continuing our support of the people of Palestine during this time of unprecedented crisis and fully support UNRWA's indispensable mission to provide assistance and protection at this moment. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland, followed by the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Poland has always believed that international law must come first. From the very beginning of this long conflict in the Middle East, we have stood firmly behind a peaceful solution. We recognized Palestine as a state nearly 40 years ago, back in December 1988, and we continue to support this two-state solution as the only viable way forward. Last fall, we welcomed President Trump's peace plan for Gaza, which was endorsed through the United Nations Security Council. We still hope it can open a new chapter in the peace process. Despite these efforts, however, we must acknowledge with deep concern that the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire. We are troubled by the Israelis' moves to limit UNRWA's work in Gaza and across Palestinian territories. This runs against both legal obligations and a basic moral responsibility. Mr. President, the United Nations system is a cornerstone of the world order we believe in, and the UNRWA, the focus of today's meeting, is a vital part of that system. It delivers help to Palestinian refugees at a scale and in line with humanitarian principles. We take seriously the findings of the Independent Review Group, and we support continued efforts to address any misconduct and to strengthen the agency's accountability. At the same time, we oppose attempts to replace the United Nations and established humanitarian organizations with alternative entities or private companies in the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian aid must be provided impartially and through mechanisms that ensure effective and unhindered access to those in need. The United Nations system remains best placed to deliver on that responsibility. We therefore call for UNRWA to be allowed to carry out its mandate without any restrictions. We appeal for respect for international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Before I conclude, Mr. President, allow me to briefly highlight Poland's contribution. Since 2005, Palestine has been one of the principal recipients of Poland's humanitarian aid and development assistance. Even as we significantly increased our support for Ukraine, we decided to maintain our funding from UNRWA. Since 2023, Poland has contributed more than $5 million to the agency, including $1 million for 2026. Beyond our support for UNRWA, Poland has continued to implement numerous humanitarian and development initiatives through the United Nations system and in partnership with Polish non-governmental organizations, with particular focus on Palestine and Lebanon. We remain committed to this engagement in support of the Palestinian people in the future. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland. I now give the floor.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic. Thank you, Mr. President. 10 days ago, the world observed World Refugee Day, reflecting on the suffering and aspirations of refugees around the globe, including Palestinian refugees whose story remains the longest-lasting plight in the world. While Syria takes pride in hosting more than 6,000 Palestinian refugees, we uphold the right to return to their country consistent with international resolutions and the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Your Excellencies, a few days ago, the Syrian national authorities announced in cooperation with UNRWA the resumption of cash assistance program for Palestinian refugees in Syria for the period from June to December 2026, in accordance with the criteria established by donor partners. The program has been reactivated to meet the needs of most vulnerable households, including female-headed households with children under the age of 18, households that include persons with disabilities, elderly couples over the age of 60, as well as orphan-headed households whose members are all under the age of 18. In addition, the national authorities, in cooperation with UNRWA, launched a package of livelihood and early recovery projects targeting hundreds of Palestinian families in Syria. Those initiatives include support for the most vulnerable households through the financing of small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as programs aimed at empowering individuals seeking to establish new businesses that contribute to improved livelihoods. UNRWA provides a wide range of services to Palestinians in Syria, including food assistance, healthcare, education, and other services. At the time when significant burdens have arisen from the large-scale return of Syrian and Palestinian refugees and displaced persons following the fall of the former regime, UNRWA launched a humanitarian appeal at the end of last year and called upon donors to respond. According to UNRWA figures, only 31% of that appeal has been funded or pledged for funding, while 69% remains unfunded. In conclusion, Syria calls upon the international community to increase its financial and political support for UNRWA as a key player to achieve security and stability in the region. Syria condemns the repeated attacks against this agency in contradiction with the rules of privileges and immunities accorded to international organizations. Syria affirms that the question of Palestinian refugees will remain a just and enduring cause, with the right of return and compensation in the heart of these rights. Thank you.
Syria.
I thank the distinguished representative of Syria.
Representative of Switzerland, followed by Malaysia and Australia.
Monsieur le Président,
President Switzerland thanks the President of the General Assembly and Secretary General, as well as the Acting Commissioner General, for their introductory remarks. The ceasefires in Lebanon, Gaza, and Iran are fragile, and Switzerland remains deeply concerned about the serious consequences for the civilian population of the various conflicts affecting the region. Access to essential services remains severely limited in the Gaza Strip, and the humanitarian situation there is dire. In the West Bank, the increase in violence committed by settlers, often with the support of security forces, is also alarming. In Lebanon, the humanitarian situation remains precarious and unpredictable. Switzerland continues to call on all parties to respect their obligations under international law, and in particular, under international humanitarian law. UNRWA provides essential support. In the current situation and in the absence of a political solution to the conflict, Switzerland recognizes the agency's central role in preventing further regional destabilization. We reiterate the obligation to ensure the protection of humanitarian and UN personnel, including local staff, as well as their facilities. We regret the critical financial situation that UNRWA continues to face, which has deteriorated even further this year. While the cost-cutting measures taken are necessary, they have a tangible impact on the quality and scope of services provided to Palestinian refugees. Given UNRWA's role, Switzerland has this year allocated, as it did in 2025, 10 million Swiss francs to the agency's programs in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. In addition, it plans to make several experts available to UNRWA to support its work. 2 years have passed since the publication of the Kelowna report. Switzerland is closely monitoring the implementation of the 50 recommendations and takes note of significant progress made, as well as the regular updates provided by the agency. We reiterate our expectation that these recommendations will be fully implemented and the reforms institutionalized, and we welcome the development of a post-Kelowna roadmap. President, allow me to conclude by reiterating our firm support for the two-state solution. This solution, in accordance with international law, is the only foundation for a just and lasting peace. Switzerland is determined to contribute to stabilization efforts, especially the implementation of the Gaza Peace Plan and the New York Declaration, which recognizes the important role of UNRWA. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative Malaysia, followed by Australia.
Mr. President, Malaysia thanks the Secretary General and the UNRWA Commissioner General ad interim for their briefings. What we have heard is deeply alarming. The briefings paint a stark picture of an agency under unprecedented strain, facing relentless political, financial, and operational pressures. At a time when the needs of Palestinian refugees have reached catastrophic levels, the agency itself is on the brink of being incapacitated. Malaysia reaffirms its unwavering support for UNRWA, whose mandate remains indispensable in providing assistance, protection, and hope to millions of Palestinian refugees. UNRWA continues to serve as the lifeline for the Palestinian people, and its work must therefore be protected, sustained, and allowed to continue without obstruction. Malaysia expresses its condolences for the loss of more than 390 UNRWA staff members killed in Gaza since October 2023. Malaysia recalls the ICJ advisory opinion of October 2025, which affirmed that restrictions on humanitarian assistance, including through UNRWA, are inconsistent with Israel's obligations as the occupying power under international law. Israel must fully comply with its international obligations, including by respecting the inviolability of UNRWA premises. In this context, Malaysia strongly condemns Israel's continued violations, including incursions into and the demolition of UNRWA premises in East Jerusalem. We reiterate our call for accountability for Israel's atrocities against the Palestinian people and its persistent breaches of international law. Mr. President, Malaysia has been a regular contributor to UNRWA and contributed over $6 million to support predictable and sustainable funding for the agency since November 2023. Consistent with this long-standing commitment, Malaysia is pleased to announce a new pledge of $1 million to UNRWA to be disbursed over 5 years from 2026 to 2030 at $200,000 per year. This contribution is a reflection of Malaysia's principled and unwavering support for the Palestinian cause. Mr. President, UNRWA's mandate must not be undermined. It must be defended. The agency's operation is essential to upholding the dignity, protection, and rights of the Palestinian refugees. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia, followed by Finland.
President, Australia commends UNRWA's extraordinary efforts in delivering vital services to Palestinians. Its work supports not only the lives of Palestinians, but also broader regional stability. In Gaza, where humanitarian conditions are catastrophic, UNRWA remains the backbone of the humanitarian response. I would like to make 3 points. First, humanitarian personnel save lives. Their work should never cost them their own. We express our deep condolences and profound sorrow for the 392 UNRWA colleagues killed in Gaza since the start of the conflict. The Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel, led by Australia and now endorsed by 111 countries, reflects a shared commitment to champion the protection of all humanitarian personnel and to preserve the irreplaceable role of principled humanitarian action as a lifeline for all civilians in times of conflict. Second, Australia has been a financial contributor to UNRWA since 1951, and we will continue our support with $20 million in funding this year. However, this meeting comes at a time of profound challenge for UNRWA's financial and operational stability. UNRWA's ability to operate depends on both the safety of its staff and the trust of its beneficiaries and donors. The agency's neutrality remains a key asset that is fundamental to its operations. UNRWA must continue to ensure that it meets the highest standards of governance and accountability, including through the implementation of management reforms expected by all stakeholders. Third, it is crucial that UNRWA and other UN agencies be allowed to deliver humanitarian aid to those who need it most. Israel's demolition of UNRWA's headquarters earlier this year set a dangerous precedent and undermined the multilateral system. We urge the Government of Israel to abide by its international obligations, respect UNRWA's privileges and immunities, and meet its responsibility to facilitate full, rapid, safe and unhindered humanitarian access. Australia continues to stand behind UNRWA, its people and the principles that make its work possible. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Finland, followed by Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, colleagues. Finland firmly supports the UN-coordinated humanitarian system and has continued to support UNRWA's mandate and work for decades. Our contribution to UNRWA this year is €5 million in flexible core funding. UNRWA has managed to continue to provide humanitarian assistance, services and protection under extremely challenging conditions to people in Gaza as well as Palestinian refugees in the West Bank, Lebanon, Jordan and Syria. UNRWA's ability to provide education, primary health care and emergency assistance to millions of Palestine refugees is important not only for humanitarian purposes, but also as a stabilizing element in the region. The situation in Gaza and across the region remains deeply alarming. Aid entering Gaza has remained largely insufficient, both in quantity and quality, while nearly the entire population depends on life-saving services. The situation in the West Bank is deteriorating rapidly due to an unprecedented surge in settler violence, frequent military operations and severe movement restrictions. Humanitarian space is extremely restricted both in Gaza and the West Bank, and the situation is difficult in neighbouring countries as well. Finland continues to call for Israel to comply with its obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law. Finland has repeatedly called for UNRWA operating conditions to be secured. Trust and trustworthiness must be maintained and strengthened. During the past 2 years, Finland has allocated funding to further develop UNRWA's risk management. We welcome the ongoing efforts to reinforce oversight mechanisms and to ensure that UNRWA continues to meet these high standards. Accountability, transparency and adherence to the highest standards in all UN operations are crucial. We welcome UNRWA's commitment to the implementation of the Colonna recommendations and recognize the progress that has been made towards their closure. We support UNRWA's efforts to develop the organization's governance structures in consultation with member states. We encourage UNRWA to advance the discussion on the future. Transparency and maintaining an open and honest dialogue are crucial. I would like to conclude by thanking UNRWA for continuing its important work in supporting Palestine refugees' rights and especially their right to a life with dignity. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Finland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia, followed by the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, allow me to thank Secretary General and the UNRWA Commissioner General for the briefing. Indonesia reiterates unwavering support for UNRWA as its work continues to support millions of Palestinians. UNRWA remains inseparable from the UN and multilateralism and will remain indispensable until a just solution to the plight of the Palestinian people is achieved. Today, UNRWA continues to face systematic attacks, political pressure, financial shortfalls, and efforts to dismantle the agency. We condemn Israel's attacks, occupations, closure and demolition of UNRWA facilities, the forced closure of schools and health centers, and other actions that seek to undermine the agency's ability to fulfill its UN mandates, including the raid to Kalandia Training Center in East Jerusalem today. Indonesia consistently calls for the protections of humanitarian workers, including UNRWA personnel. Against these backdrops, sustained political and financial support for the agency is even more critical. Indonesia will continue to be at the forefront of these efforts. Together with South Africa, Indonesia submitted UNGA Resolution 8077, which extends UNRWA's mandate until 2029. With Norway and members of the core group, we initiated the ICJ advisory opinion on the obligations of Israel in relation to the presence of activities of international organizations and co-sponsored its subsequent resolutions. This year, we sustained our voluntary contribution of $1.2 million to UNRWA. In a broader context, the government of Indonesia and its people have delivered humanitarian assistance amounting to $22.5 million since November 2023. Mr. President, supporting UNRWA is tantamount to supporting human dignity, regional stability, and the prospect for a just and lasting peace in the region. The international community must increase its pressure on Israel to fully comply with its legal obligations, remove operational obstacles on the agency, and open all crossings to ensure humanitarian aid reaches those in need. Indonesia continues to call for global solidarity to support the realizations of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the two-state solution based on the internationally agreed parameters. Indonesia further calls on universal recognition of the State of Palestine and its rightful place in the family of the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, followed by Malta.
Distinguished President, the Russian Federation agrees with today's alarming assessment of the situation of UNRWA. This essentially is an unprecedented crisis caused by Israel's persistent efforts to destroy this unique UN body, which over almost 80 years has been providing comprehensive assistance to Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories as well as in neighboring Arab countries, that is Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. The implementation of UNRWA's mandate remains the key to continued international efforts to find a solution to one of the aspects of final status, the fundamental right of return of Palestinian refugees. UNRWA staff continue to conscientiously implement their mandate in extremely perilous and often inhumane conditions. We pay tribute to the high price the UN has paid in Gaza and commemorate the humanitarian workers who have died in Gaza. We are equally concerned about the anti-UNRWA campaign of Israel in the West Bank, where UNRWA staff are being demonized and infrastructure is being flat out destroyed. We categorically reject damaging and incendiary efforts by West Jerusalem to tarnish the agency's reputation, eliminating its human and organizational resources. Israel, as the occupying power, is obliged to assist the population of the occupied territory. National security considerations cannot justify the non-implementation of IHL obligations. The legal assessment of Israel's actions with regard to Palestinian lands is laid out in detail in the advisory opinion of the ICJ of 2025. This document also highlights the need for respecting the mandate and status of UNRWA. We are firmly convinced that the activities of the agency have a stabilizing effect for the entire region. We welcome the decision of a number of countries to take on additional financial obligations with regard to UNRWA. For our part, for many years, we have faithfully upheld our existing obligations. At the beginning of this year, we once again contributed $2 million to UNRWA's budget. In the context of today's event, as well as given the fact that the work of the Board of Peace is clearly foundering, we must recall the well-known Russian initiative, which aims to resolve the acute problems faced by Gaza. In January of this year, our leadership publicly announced they were willing to send $1 billion to the Board of Peace Fund for rebuilding Gaza out of frozen Russian assets. President, in closing, I would like to once again call for a lasting ceasefire in Gaza, without which it is impossible to ensure full-fledged humanitarian access. Israel and Palestine ought to exist in peace and security and 67 borders. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta, followed by San Marino.
President, thank you for convening this conference in such a critical moment for UNRWA and for the millions of Palestinian refugees who depend on it. Malta aligns with the statement delivered by the EU and is adding the following in its national capacity. From Gaza to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and across Jordan, Lebanon and Syria, UNRWA remains a key provider of essential services and humanitarian assistance in coordination with the broader UN system and humanitarian partners. Malta reaffirms its support for the agency's mandate renewed by the General Assembly pending a just and lasting resolution of the question of Palestinian refugees in line with international law and relevant UNSC resolutions. Malta acknowledges the work undertaken by UNRWA in implementing the recommendations of the Colonna report. We call on the agency to continue its path of reform, demonstrating its commitment to neutrality in a transparent, credible and sustained manner. These reforms must now be fully institutionalized and accountability must be ensured. Concurrently, while recognizing its security concerns, we call on Israel to fully comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Malta remains gravely concerned about obstacles to the agency's work, as well as attacks against UN premises and personnel. We call for UNRWA to be allowed to operate safely, effectively, and without obstruction, in full respect of the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. Furthermore, Malta calls for the resumption of immediate, unimpeded, and safe delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza at a time when access must be expanded and not constrained. Yet mandates cannot be fulfilled by political support and statements alone. The agency today faces severe and persistent financial pressure that threatens its very capacity to function. Let us be clear. A funding gap for UNRWA is not an abstract phenomenon. It is a child out of school, a clinic that closes its doors, a family left without protection. It is in this spirit that Malta will continue to provide financial support to UNRWA during 2026. Predictable and sustainable financing of the agency remains a shared responsibility and one we will continue to uphold. Ultimately, support for UNRWA must be seen within the broader objective of regional stability, respect for international humanitarian law, and the pursuit of a just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution, where Israel and Palestine live side by side in peace and security. Malta stands ready to work with all partners committed to these goals. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of San Marino, followed by the Philippines.
Excellencies, in this critical moment, the Republic of San Marino reconfirms its firm support for the vital and irreplaceable mandate of UNRWA and remains deeply concerned by the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe unfolding across the region. For decades, UNRWA has served as the backbone of regional stability, providing essential health care, clean water, education, and social services to millions of vulnerable Palestinian refugees. Today, its operations represent the literal line between survival and total societal collapse. San Marino strongly commends the profound institutional reforms undertaken by UNRWA over the past 2 years. The agency's decisive action to implement the recommendation outlined in the Colonna report, alongside its collaboration with international oversight bodies, demonstrates an exemplary commitment to transparency, accountability, and to the core humanitarian principles of neutrality and independence. At the same time, San Marino is deeply concerned about the severe logistical blockades, the critical infrastructure starvation, and massive financial shortfalls that currently paralyze UNRWA's field activities. The strict restrictions imposed on UNRWA's activities do not serve the cause of security. Instead, they inflict a devastating toll on innocent civilians, particularly children. We call upon all parties to the conflict to fulfill their obligations under international law by granting immediate, safe, and unhindered access to humanitarian workers and rapid passage of essential supplies. Excellencies, the Republic of San Marino urgently appeals to the international community to guarantee sustainable and predictable financial support to UNRWA. In this spirit, we are pleased to announce a contribution of €20,000. This contribution represents a meaningful commitment in light of our national capacity. We offer it in the conviction that effective multilateralism rests on the willingness of every state to contribute according to its means and shared responsibility for addressing humanitarian crises. San Marino stands ready to support all diplomatic efforts aimed at ensuring that aid reaches those in desperate need without delay. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of San Marino. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines, followed by Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Philippines thanks you for convening the pledging conference, and thanks to Secretary General and UNRWA's Acting Commissioner General for their sobering briefs. The Philippines shares the continuing deep concern of the international community over the humanitarian situation in Palestine. In this regard, UNRWA plays a critical role in delivering essential services and humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, even under unprecedented political, financial, and operational challenges. We renew the call for the unhampered delivery of humanitarian assistance and for full adherence by all parties to international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians, especially women and children, also UN humanitarian aid personnel, in line with the Coloma report. We note that there was a large reduction in the program budget in 2025 and that extra budgetary resources were severely needed to help address the situation in Gaza. We also take note of the internal measures that seek to mitigate the shortage of cash flow and budget deficit and recognize efforts to increase donors and the quantity of funding. The Philippines reaffirms our support for a two-state solution and for promoting the conditions for peace and advancing a durable political solution in the region in accordance with UN Security Council resolutions and the New York Declaration. In this regard, and in solidarity with the Palestinian people and in support of the vital work of UNRWA, I'm pleased to inform you that the Philippines has already remitted our voluntary financial contribution for the 2026 program budget of UNRWA of $100,000 and commit to providing flexible contributions to UNRWA in the succeeding fiscal years. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium, followed by Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, Belgium aligns itself with the statement delivered by the EU on behalf of its member states. The following additional points are made in national capacity. We thank you for organizing the annual UNRWA Pledging Conference. Mr. Commissioner General, your staff continues to perform its duties and deliver tremendous work under unspeakable conditions, sometimes at the cost of their own lives. We extend our sincere condolences to the families and loved ones of UNRWA personnel, as well as all humanitarian, medical and UN staff and civilians who have been killed. UNRWA is facing severe financial constraints and needs our collective support to maintain its essential services. In this regard, Belgium aligns itself with the European Union's call for broader, more predictable and sustainable international support to ensure the agency's financial sustainability. Belgium has consistently provided flexible, predictable and multi-annual funding to UNRWA through long-term agreements, and we encourage other donors to do the same. In 2026, Belgium disbursed a tranche of €7 million as part of its multi-annual core contribution launched in 2024, supporting the continuity of UNRWA's operations. In addition, a second tranche of €4.5 million under a multi-annual program will be released shortly, supporting, inter alia, the e-archives project and education in emergencies, areas that require sustained donor engagement. Belgium remains firmly committed to supporting UNRWA, in line with its broader commitment to humanitarian principles and humanitarian diplomacy. We also welcome the progress made in implementing the recommendations of the independent Colonna report, which has contributed to strengthening neutrality, oversight and accountability within the agency. We encourage UNRWA to continue these efforts and ensure that these reforms are fully institutionalized and sustained over time, in line with the European Union's position. Belgium will further demonstrate its commitment during its upcoming presidency of the UNRWA Advisory Commission, where we will actively support the agency and strengthen collective engagement. We once again thank UNRWA personnel for their dedication and commitment. Belgium remains a strong, reliable and predictable supporter of the agency. Supporting UNRWA is an investment in human dignity, in regional stability and in the prospects for a just and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belgium.
And I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of the Lebanese Republic.
Sayyid Rais.
Mr. President, we thank you for convening this meeting and thank the Secretary General and the Commissioner General ad interim for their statements. Mr. President, we hold this conference at a time when the agency continues to face unprecedented challenges that are financial and operational. May this conference represent an opportunity to renew our political and financial commitment to the agency and to provide the additional contributions that allow it to bridge the deficit in the budget and to carry forth its services. And as a reminder, the UNRWA has been established especially to serve the Palestinian refugees until a final settlement for the Palestinian question. We must reiterate our complete commitment to the mandate granted to the UNRWA by the General Assembly by Resolution 302 and the need for it to carry out its services without interruption. And we reiterate our complete rejection of imposing additional burdens on the countries that host the Palestinian refugees because that is a violation of international justice, in addition to being a burden that is unbearable. Lebanon is a leading host country of our Palestinian brethren, and we continue to provide assistance despite the successive crises and wars on our territory and our deteriorating economic capacity. The UNRWA has proven that it is the most capable and knowledgeable agency of the local conditions and the affairs of Palestinian refugees. It has continued its noble mission despite the challenges and the attacks against its headquarters and staff. It has paid a hefty price for this mission, where 392 staff have been killed in recent years. We condemn, as Lebanon, the attacks against the headquarters and the staff of the UNRWA, and in particular in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank, and as we similarly condemn the legislation targeting the UNRWA. At the same time, we applaud its continued services and developments and improvement in its working methods and its implementation of the Kelowna recommendations. And indeed, 80% of the recommendations have been fully implemented, and the remaining recommendations are under implementation. Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the permanent representative of Lebanon, and I now give the floor to Greece, followed by Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Greece aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. Mr. President, against the backdrop of heightened instability, protracted conflicts and mounting humanitarian needs across the Middle East, UNRWA has continued to fulfill its mandate with remarkable resilience. It delivers critical humanitarian aid, education, medical and social services to millions of Palestinian refugees. From Gaza and West Bank to Lebanon, Jordan and Syria, the agency remains indispensable, not only as a humanitarian lifeline, but also as a pillar of stability across the region, as we have repeatedly emphasized. The dedication, professionalism and sacrifices of UNRWA staff under extremely difficult and dangerous conditions cannot be overstressed. It is thus imperative that UNRWA personnel be protected at all times in line with international humanitarian law, and that they are allowed to operate fully within their mandate. Greece supported the renewal of UNRWA's mandate, as well as the General Assembly resolution linked to the relevant ICJ advisory opinion. We also maintained and increased our financial contribution in 2025, and we pledge to continue contributing this year as well. We call upon the international community to continue supporting the agency's mandate. Finally, Greece reiterates the importance of the full implementation of the recommendations included in the Kelowna report and welcomes the progress achieved thus far. Neutrality, accountability and transparency play a key role in preserving the agency's credibility, reinforcing donor confidence and ensuring the continued delivery of its vital humanitarian mandate. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Greece. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein, followed by Guyana and Thailand.
Thank you, Chair. Liechtenstein joins friends and partners today in acknowledging UNRWA's indispensable assistance to Palestinian refugees across the Middle East region, and especially the lifeline it provides to civilians in Gaza today. UNRWA's delivery of essential humanitarian goods and services, as well as its operations in areas such as healthcare and education, make a significant contribution to the stability of the region. In times like these, its work is and will continue to be more necessary than ever. We pay tribute to all the UNRWA employees who lost their lives in 2025 while trying to save the lives of others and alleviate their suffering in the most extreme of circumstances. We reiterate our full condemnation of any attacks on humanitarian personnel and the imposition of undue restrictions on humanitarian aid. Our support for UNRWA services in the occupied Palestinian territories and neighboring countries is an important element of Liechtenstein's humanitarian and development assistance to the Middle East region. I'm therefore pleased to announce that Liechtenstein is maintaining its support for UNRWA in 2026 in the amount of 100,000 Swiss francs to support its work in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. We hope that this financial contribution will assist UNRWA in carrying out its work to full capacity. Chair, we reiterate our appreciation for the Colonna report, which has provided the basis on which UNRWA will take the necessary steps to uphold neutrality in its work. We have been encouraged by UNRWA's swift and constructive response to the recommendations and note the significant progress already made, with 80% of the report's 50 recommendations now completed. Continued commitment to the full and sustained implementation of the remaining recommendations will be key to further strengthening accountability, transparency, and neutrality, which are essential pillars of humanitarian response. We look forward to continued support for UNRWA's work, which will only be strengthened by its implementation of the report. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana, followed by Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. President. Guyana thanks the President of the General Assembly for the initiative in convening this pledging conference for UNRWA. I also thank the Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Commissioner General Saunders for their crucial insights. Mr. President, Guyana remains a strong supporter of peace and stability in the Middle East. We view the peaceful, just, and lasting resolution of the question of Palestine as central to this goal. While efforts are expended on the political front to achieve this objective through the implementation of the two-state solution, the needs of the Palestinian people must be adequately met. This is especially critical at this juncture, where humanitarian needs in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, are elevated. The United Nations and the international community as a whole have a responsibility to respond to the needs of the Palestinian people. In this context, the work and mandate of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, are indispensable. In its 76 years of existence, UNRWA has developed unparalleled experience in delivering social services to the Palestinian people across the territories in which it operates. It has also been instrumental in contributing to the development of economic capacity by the Palestinian people. Beyond this, and perhaps most importantly, UNRWA has earned the trust and respect of the Palestinian people to accompany them on their path to self-determination. Considering the important mandate given to UNRWA by the General Assembly, it is unfortunate that the agency's work is consistently challenged by chronic underfunding. It would be extremely useful, therefore, if member states would consider concrete measures to end this shortage of funds. Mr. President, the government of Guyana remains a firm supporter of UNRWA's mandate and has decided to make a modest contribution of $100,000 in support of that mandate. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guyana. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand, followed by Montenegro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thailand expresses its appreciation to UNRWA for its dedication and sacrifice in providing essential services and life-saving assistance to Palestinian refugees under unprecedentedly challenging conditions. We commend and honor the agency's unwavering commitment and pay heartfelt tribute to all personnel who have lost their lives or sustained injuries in the line of duty. Since 1978, Thailand has consistently supported UNRWA through voluntary contributions, multi-year pledges, and emergency flash appeals. In recognition of the agency's indispensable role in addressing the humanitarian needs of Palestinian refugees, despite mounting operational challenges, Thailand is pleased to announce the renewal of its multi-year pledge of $200,000 for the period 2027 to 2031. Furthermore, Thailand will make an additional contribution of $50,000 in support of the agency's 2026 flash appeal. We join the Secretary General and other member states in urging the international community and all stakeholders to sustain the agency's life-saving work. Predictable and adequate funding is indispensable to ensuring uninterrupted health care, education, social protection, and livelihood for millions of Palestine refugees. Mr. President, financial contributions are essential to meeting growing humanitarian needs and sustaining the lifeline on which millions of Palestine refugees depend. Yet funding alone is not enough. UNRWA serves as the backbone of humanitarian assistance for more than 5.9 million Palestine refugees across its areas of operation. So the agency must be able to carry out its mandate independently, impartially, and without obstruction. Beyond financial support, the agency needs our collective backing, political backing, and steadfast commitment to safeguard its mandate and ensure the continuity of its operation. Supporting UNRWA is not only a humanitarian imperative, but also an investment in dignity, stability, and hope for millions of Palestine refugees. Thailand stands firmly with the agency in fulfilling this vital mission. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Thailand. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro, followed by the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Montenegro aligns itself with the statement delivered by the EU and wishes to make the following remarks in its national capacity. I would like to thank the PGA for convening this important event, given the immeasurable role of UNRWA in providing essential quality services to numerous Palestine refugees in the region. UNRWA serves as the backbone of the humanitarian response in the region and contributes significantly to the viability of the two-state solution. In times of unprecedented crisis, Montenegro issues a strong appeal to unconditional respect of the international humanitarian law. We specifically emphasize that the UN agencies must be guaranteed safe, unhindered access to deliver life-saving assistance to those who need it most. For Montenegro, the well-being and protection of children remain of particular importance. By ensuring uninterrupted access to quality education for hundreds of thousands of Palestine refugee children, alongside essential primary health care and support for families' livelihoods, UNRWA helps protect not only children's fundamental rights, but also their future. Investing in children is indispensable for building lasting peace and stability. Montenegro also welcomes progress in implementing the Colonna Review recommendations and the strengthening of oversight structures. These initiatives are key to maintaining donor confidence and ensuring the agency's continued integrity and effectiveness. Mr. President, Montenegro will continue to support UNRWA's important work with financial contributions. My country has been a stable agency donor, and I am delighted to announce that this year as well, the government of Montenegro pledges the contribution of $10,000 to UNRWA for the current budget period. While modest, this contribution reflects our commitment to humanitarian principles, regional stability, and assisting vulnerable populations in accessing essential services. We strongly believe that UNRWA will continue its invaluable mission and positively impact the lives of millions of Palestine refugees amidst these multifaceted challenges. Montenegro stands firmly with rules-based international order and the UN Charter. We will continue to be a vocal advocate for peace, the protection of human rights, and the delivery of essential aid to those who need it most. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Montenegro. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, followed by Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to Mr. Sanders, Commissioner General at Interim, for his comprehensive briefing. The Republic of Korea commends on UNRWA for its enduring role over the past 7 decades in delivering essential services, including education and health care to Palestine refugees, often under highly challenging circumstances. And in this line, we fully recognize the dedication and efforts of the agency's staff on the ground. As geopolitical uncertainties persist and donors' financial landscape remains constrained, It is critical for the United Nations and member states to work together so that these challenges do not translate into deeper humanitarian hardship for Palestine refugees. To achieve greater impact on the ground, it is crucial UNRWA's humanitarian activities to be better linked to resilience building, self-reliance, and early-stage development. I believe this would also allow the agency to make the most of its resources at a time when it faces financial challenges. Efforts to mobilize and leverage other financial resources remain equally important. In this way, it is critical for UNRWA to continue building on its expertise and strengths in areas including education and health, helping to bring out the potential of the Palestinian people. Neutrality, transparency, and accountability are vital to sustaining the international community's confidence in UNRWA's work. I take note of the agency's effort to enhance member states' understanding of its operations, including the implementation of recommendations related to neutrality, and encourage the agency to continue this effort. The ROK has continued to provide financial support to UNRWA, and this year, we have already contributed approximately $1.5 million to its regular budget. We will also continue to work with UN agencies to support the Palestinian people in Gaza. In closing, the ROK reaffirms its solidarity to and support for Palestine refugees and reiterates its support for UNRWA's work for their benefit. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan, followed by Colombia and Germany.
Thank you, President. For over 7 decades, UNRWA has been the indispensable lifeline for millions of Palestinian refugees, delivering education, healthcare, relief, protection, and shelter under the most arduous conditions. It is more than a humanitarian agency. It is the tangible expression of our collective international responsibility towards Palestine refugees, pending a just and lasting political resolution. The agency faces a severe financial crisis with an estimated budget shortfall of approximately $220 million, threatening essential services for millions of vulnerable refugees. While the dedication and hard work of UNRWA colleagues are invaluable assets, predictable, sustainable, and increased funding is an obligation. I will make 4 points. First, no other actor can replicate UNRWA's unique mandate or operational reach. The agency must be allowed to exercise its mission across the occupied Palestinian territory without hindrance, obstruction, or interference. Second, Israeli legislation targeting UNRWA is illegal and must be rescinded. The agency's privileges and immunities under international law must be fully upheld. We condemn the raids and seizures of UNRWA premises and reject any measure designed to erode its mandate or operational integrity. Third, people who serve to provide life-saving assistance should not be target of violence. There must be accountability for 392 UNRWA personnel killed since the start of the conflict. Fourth, UNRWA cannot be decoupled from the core final status issue of Palestinian refugees. The answer is not to dismantle the agency, but to end the Israeli occupation, enable refugee return in line with international law and relevant UN resolutions, and realize the two-state solution on the pre-1967 borders, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as the capital of an independent sovereign Palestine. President, UNRWA's mandate must be preserved, strengthened, and adequately resourced. We endorse the Kelowna recommendations as a constructive pathway towards reinforcing the agency's effectiveness and accountability. Pakistan will positively enhance its financial contribution to UNRWA this year, and we urge all member states to match or surpass their existing commitments. I thank you very much, Ambassador.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia, followed by Germany, the last speaker for this morning.
Gracias, señor. Thank you, Mr. President. Colombia is grateful for the presentations delivered today, in particular to the ad interim Commissioner General of UNRWA, Christian Saunders. Today, more than ever, UNRWA is an entity that must be respected because it provides humanitarian assistance. It is a pillar of protection, regional stability and human dignity. Its experience has been built over decades in its operational capacities. Colombia reiterates its full support for the mandate entrusted by the General Assembly to UNRWA. This mandate remains in force and cannot be ignored. We are concerned by the agency's financial situation, Mr. President. The structural deficit and the austerity measures are seriously jeopardizing the continuity of its activities and the provision of essential services for millions of people. We make an urgent appeal to donor countries to provide predictable, flexible and sustained resources to fund UNRWA is a political, legal and humanitarian obligation to peace, stability and the protection of the population who have been waiting for justice for decades. Lastly, we reiterate the need to guarantee full respect for the status, privileges and immunities of UNRWA and to ensure that its staff can do their work without restrictions, obstacles or attacks. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia. I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Germany.
Thank you very much, President. Germany aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. UNRWA helps create prospects and hope for those who would otherwise be left without them. In a context where all development and humanitarian systems are under severe strain, the agency delivers education, healthcare and humanitarian relief to millions of Palestine refugees. And in doing so, UNRWA plays an important stabilizing role in each of its fields of operation. As UNRWA works to sustain prospects for Palestine refugees, its mission matters beyond the immediate. Germany remains firmly committed to a negotiated two-state solution with the Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace and security. And to sustain UNRWA services, its institutions, and above all, the opportunities that it provides today, its contribution to keeping this political horizon within reach for tomorrow. At the same time, Germany has been clear and consistent. Our support to and the continued reform of the agency go hand in hand. To sustainably deliver on its mandate, UNRWA must continue to strive for the highest standards of neutrality, transparency, and accountability. UNRWA has to continue reforms with utmost determination, both within and beyond the Kelowna process. Reforms are not a constraint on the agency and its mandate. They are what allows us, as donors, to sustain our trust and engagement. And moreover, the agency, its donors, and its host ought to remain open to reform pathways that make the agency more efficient, capitalize on integrating services, and that make UNRWA's fiscal model more stable and predictable. And in this context, let me express our sincere appreciation for the exchanges that we had with Acting Commissioner General Saunders. The leadership shown and the decisions taken to undergird the agency's sustainable way ahead are precisely what is needed to maintain donor confidence. We encourage the agency to continue pursuing this course with determination. President, colleagues, Germany remains among the agency's most committed partners. Already this year, Germany has provided over $65 million in support of UNRWA's work in the region. I would like to close with an appeal to all partners in this room. Together, we can step up, not step back. UNRWA's mission is a shared responsibility and a shared investment in the region's future. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Germany. We have just heard the last speaker for this morning. We will hear the remaining delegations on the list of speakers this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this chamber. The meeting is suspended.